We're going to stay with that breaking news into the investigation on the fatal shooting of conservative activist and Turning Point USA co-founder Charlie Kirk. Officials say they now have a suspect in custody. President Donald Trump was the first to break that news just this morning. The person in custody has been identified as 22-year-old Tyler Robinson. And here is the FBI with much more on his arrest.
On the evening of September 11th, a family member of Tyler Robinson reached out to a family friend who contacted the Washington County Sheriff's Office with information that Robinson had confessed to them or implied that he had committed the incident. This information was relayed to the Utah County Sheriff's Office and scene investigators at Utah Valley University. This information was also conveyed to the FBI. Investigators reviewed additional video footage from UVU surveillance and identified Robinson arriving on UVU campus in a gray Dodge Challenger at approximately 8:29 a.m. on September 10th, in which he is observed on video in a plain maroon t-shirt, light-colored shorts, a black hat with a white logo, and light-colored shoes. When encountered in person by investigators in Washington County on September 12th, in the early morning hours, Robinson was observed in consistent clothing with those surveillance images.
Now, this major development comes after the FBI ramped up their investigation yesterday, releasing never-before-seen pictures and videos of the person of interest. The first video there shows the moment the suspected gunman climbed off the roof and fled the scene moments after the fatal shooting. Let's go to CBS News national security contributor Sam Vinograd. Sam, thank you for joining us today. What stood out to you from that news conference with FBI officials?
Well, the news conference with law enforcement officials from all levels of government really proved to walk the public through the details of the investigatory process. We learned that this individual confessed to a family member. That family member then contacted a friend, and that friend then contacted law enforcement. So the role of this individual's family and friends was critical in bringing this individual into custody. We also learned a little bit about the arc of this individual's radicalization and mobilization to violence. Family members reportedly told law enforcement that this individual was filled with hate, for example. We also learned that this individual was communicating with his roommate, allegedly over Discord, about the location of the rifle itself. Now investigators will be combing through evidence, forensic evidence from interviews with witnesses, friends and family, to try to ascertain whether this individual was in touch with anyone else about his plans. Was he trying to inspire anyone else to take similar action? Did anyone help him plan this attack? And if along the way this horrific assassination could have been prevented in any way. But coming out of the press conference, there were some conflicting information about whether there will be additional arrests and whether there is an ongoing threat to the public. Hopefully that's not the case, Muga.
Yeah, and Sam, we're also learning more information about the words engraved on shell casings in the gun that the suspect used. So take a listen and we'll get your take on the other side of things.
Investigators noted inscriptions that had been engraved on casings found with the rifle. Inscriptions on a fired casing read, "Notices, bulges, capital OWO, what's this, question mark." Inscriptions on the 3 unfired casings read, "Hey fascist, exclamation point, catch, exclamation point." Up arrow symbol, right arrow and symbol, and 3 down arrow symbols. A second unfired casing read, "Oh Bella Chow, Bella Chow, Bella Chow, Chow Chow." And a third unfired casing read, "If you read this, you are gay, LMAO."
And so, Sam, you heard that there. When we see cases like this, shootings like this, the big question is always why. So what do you think that says about motive in this case?
Well, in the press conference, we heard about the engravings on the casings. We also heard about statements the suspect reportedly made to family members about hate for Charlie Kirk. So the combination of what's written on the engravings and the alleged statements that were made to family members would lead us to believe that the motive here was political violence, political hatred. But investigators will have to continue doing their work to say that with certainty, but that certainly does look to be the case at this point.
Okay. Sam Vinograd, thank you so much for joining us. Now, CBS News correspondent Carter Evans is in Utah and was at that press conference. Carter, what stood out to you about this?
Well, you know, first I want to pick up on something that Sam said about motive, because I asked the governor if he was cooperating and talking with authorities, and he said he couldn't discuss that. Then I asked him if he talked about a motive, and he said he wouldn't discuss that either. Yes, of course, his political leanings were certainly part of this, but what was it exactly that drove him to go find that gun, get in the car, drive 250 miles north, and actually follow through with this crime? And that's one thing that we still have unanswered right now. What we do know is that authorities have a tremendous amount of evidence linking him to this crime. Of course, they have the gun, they have all of this video evidence. I would presume at this point they've probably got fingerprints and DNA. FBI Director Kash Patel mentioned how they had flown that evidence back to Quantico to be tested right away, and so it looks like they have a handle on that right now. The question that I have, and another question that I asked the governor, was about these Discord messages. He mentioned that the suspect here had been communicating with his roommate over Discord about the gun, and actually asked him to go retrieve the gun in this wooded area where we know authorities found it. When did that happen? Did that happen on the day of the shooting? Did that individual report it to police? Could they be considered an accomplice? You know, I asked the governor that, and they said right now they presume he acted alone, but this investigation is still ongoing, and they've got a lot of evidence to go through right now. So those are a couple of questions that I have. Also, they mentioned that 11,000 tips came in. That's a lot, and they've been following up on a lot. They have an army of people here to follow up on this. And I'm curious, were they on his trail already? Or was it just simply that he turned himself in? Either way, he's in custody right now, but that's some answers that I would like to have, and we'll probably get them next week when we get these charging documents. They've got 3 days to put those together, and then we'll see a preliminary hearing next week, and we're going to get a lot of information there.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure we will. And Carter, I want to stay on that because we heard from FBI officials during that news conference that it was, you know, the father who persuaded the suspect to turn himself in. And then he also mentioned just now that they've got so many tips on this case. But again, it does seem like having that relative push the suspect to come forward really helped officials arrest him, right?
Right. But you know, what were those tips that came in? I mean, you saw those images that they released, especially the enhanced ones last night. I mean, he was wearing sunglasses, but, you know, those pictures were so clear that if you knew that person, I mean, you'd be able to recognize them right away. So I'm wondering if some of those tips came in were people who were saying, I know who this guy is, and here's where he lives. So were they hot on his trail? I mean, with all the information that was coming in and all the evidence they had, it's likely they were already on his trail.
Wow. Yeah. CBS News correspondent Carter Evans, thank you so much for your time today. And CBS News Justice correspondent Scott MacFarlane joins us now for much more. Scott, what have we heard from the Justice Department so far about all of this?
This is going to shift from a federal investigation into a federal prosecution, potentially over the course of the weekend and into early next week. You'll get a criminal information, a charging document initially charging Tyler Robinson, potentially with multiple federal felonies. Then there's a preliminary hearing and a detention hearing where the Department of Justice will make an argument to the judge as to why they want Tyler Robinson held in pretrial detention pending trial in the case. That's almost certainly going to happen from the Department of Justice's purview. The investigation was both local and federal in nature. You had the state governor, you had state Department of Public Safety officers there, you had the federal investigators there, and the FBI too. So this was a multi-level, multi-layer investigation, so it's also possible there's some local charges filed here. Carter mentioned the 11,000 tips and the open-ended question whether any one of them was distinctively helpful in this case, or whether this simply was a person who confessed to a family member, who turned to a family friend, who turned to law enforcement. And though those questions weren't declaratively answered today, we could find out more when those court proceedings begin as early as Monday.
And Scott, I think it's safe to say there were some missteps with the FBI from the very beginning, especially when we have FBI Director Kash Patel, who took to social media and said, hey, we've arrested a suspect. That obviously turned out to not be the case. We know the Trump administration gutted much of the FBI. So how has that influenced these investigations, if it even has at all?
Well, it's led to criticism of the FBI director, who has been taking heat publicly and, of all places, on social media for the communication strategy used in the initial hours. The FBI director, who you heard from during the news conference, Kash Patel, had posted Wednesday night on social media that a subject was in custody for this shooting. Later, he had to post about 90 minutes later that that person had been released and was not connected to the shooting. But any of this happening on social media before law enforcement was to announce it in a more traditional setting, that's a change. And there's been criticism that if you announce somebody's in custody prematurely or incorrectly, you give a false sense of security to the public, which is a problem. Now, the president going on cable TV this morning to be the first to announce an arrest, that's untraditional as well, to put it mildly. Doesn't mean there's any issue there, but legal analysts immediately responded saying that is fodder for pretrial motions about jury pools, about defense strategy. All of that is a variable. We're not sure how that plays out because this is the first time that's ever happened.
Certainly is. Scott MacFarlane, thank you. Now, as we mentioned earlier, President Trump was the first to break the news of a suspect being in custody for the fatal shooting of conservative activist Charlie Kirk. You heard Scott talk about that. Here's a bit of what the president had to say.
I think with a high degree of certainty, we have him in custody, right? In custody. Everyone did a great job. We worked with the local police, the governor. Everybody did a great job. Well, I hope he's going to be found guilty, I would imagine, and I hope he gets the death penalty. What he did, Charlie Kirk was the finest person. He didn't deserve this.
CBS News correspondent Natalie Brand is following all of this for us from the White House. Natalie, what else did the president say about this shooting?
Yeah, Mugo, he went into detail about what he knew about the investigation, the suspect being taken into custody before it was announced in that news conference. And that really speaks to the closeness of the relationship between the President of the United States and Charlie Kirk, who he really described as kind of a member of the family. He had a direct line to President Trump. He was a close ally, advisor, and friend, and that started years ago on the campaign trail. President Trump really crediting Kirk for helping to mobilize, turn out young conservative voters. And I just can't overstate just the grief that has overtaken the White House this week. And, you know, the president giving more details about when he learned about the shooting, and also confirming this morning that he will attend Kirk's funeral in Arizona.
And we know Kirk's casket was flown from Utah to Arizona just yesterday on Air Force Two. Can you talk to us about the significance of that moment?
Yeah, the Vice President, J.D. Vance, went to social media late Wednesday night and really detailed the closeness of the relationship and the friendship he had with Kirk. He credits Kirk for helping to launch his political career, for advocating for him to become Trump's running mate. So he personally flew to Salt Lake City yesterday, changing plans. He was supposed to be at a 9/11 remembrance and instead went to Salt Lake to meet Kirk's family, wife, and personally fly the casket from Utah to Arizona, where Kirk lived, where his political group Turning Point USA was headquartered, and where he will be laid to rest. The vice president reacting to the breaking news this morning on social media. I think you saw that social media post. He called this a big breakthrough, but also went on to say that in some ways the investigation is still in its early days, but I do believe we have the shooter in custody. And he ends by saying, say a prayer for Erica Kirk and those two beautiful babies. You know, everyone, really an outpouring of support and condolences to the wife and young children that Kirk leaves behind.
Natalie, I want to go back to that press conference really quickly. The governor of Utah talked about political violence. What did he have to say?
Yeah, and Governor Cox earlier this week, in the hours after the shooting, said the nation seems broken right now. And he really stressed that message again this morning after news was revealed about the arrest, saying that, the very act that Charlie championed, freedom of expression, having his life taken in that very act makes it more difficult for people to feel like they can share ideas. Calling this an attack on all of us, an attack on the ideals of democracy. And he compared this time to the late 60s, the political violence and turmoil of that period, and also had a message for younger people saying, we are at a turning point here. Let's take a listen to what he had to say in his own words.
Right now, if I could, I need to talk to the young people in our state, in my state, and all across the country. As President Trump reminded me, he said, you know who really loved Charlie? The youths. And he's right. Young people loved Charlie, and young people hated Charlie. And Charlie went into those places anyway. And these are the words that have helped me. Charlie said, when people stop talking, that's when you get violence. He said, the weak can never forgive. Forgiveness is the attribute of the strong. The only way out of the labyrinth of suffering is to forgive. Welcome without judgment, love without condition, forgive without limit. He said, always forgive your enemies. Nothing annoys them so much. A few months ago, I referenced this last night, Charlie posted to social media, when things are moving very fast and people are losing their minds, it's important to stay grounded. Turn off your phone, read scripture, spend time with friends, and remember, internet fury is not real life. It's going to be okay. He again said, when you stop having a human connection with someone you disagree with, it becomes a lot easier to commit violence. He said, what we as a culture have to get back to is being able to have a reasonable agreement, where violence is not an option. Now, again, to my young friends out there, you are inheriting a country where politics feels like rage. It feels like rage is the only option. But through those words, we have a reminder that we can choose a different path. Your generation.
Governor going on to say that this is our moment. Do we escalate or find an off-ramp? And it comes, Mugo, as we've learned, a number of elected officials and lawmakers who are going to have political rallies over the weekend are now choosing to postpone them, trying to come up with security plans in light of just the shock and grief that has really overtaken the nation, Mugo.
Yeah, certainly. Natalie Brand, thank you.